Job chapter number 1, we got to halfway through verse 1. We are going to go further tonight. We will go further than halfway through a verse. We are looking tonight at measuring greatness. Measuring greatness. Job chapter number 1. Verse 1 says, "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there was born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. And his substance also was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the east. And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offering according to the number of them all. For Job said, It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord, and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God, and escheweth evil? I'm going to leave off our reading there tonight. I'm going to ask you this question. How do you define greatness? How do you define greatness? What is greatness to you? The Super Bowl just took place on Sunday, their Sunday, our Monday morning. Cornelius got up at the crack of dawn to go watch that game. 6 a.m. he said he was meeting with his American buddies to have an American grill out or whatever they do. So he went and watched the game. Tom Brady, for all those who've don't know much about Tom Brady over this part of the world, but Tom Brady won his 7th Super Bowl. He now individually has won more Super Bowl rings. They get rings when they win championships. He's won 7 Super Bowl rings personally himself, more than any NFL team combined. Any team has won. He personally has won more than any of the next teams. The most is 6 by a team, has won 6 times. He personally has won 7. They call him the GOAT. That's a thing that's tossed around now, right? They get tossed around the GOAT, and different players get it. Nathan Lyon for the Australian cricket team gets called the GOAT, and others get called the GOAT in rugby league and different places. The GOAT just simply means greatest of all time. G-O-A-T, that's what they mean. Greatest of all time. Tom Brady, the GOAT. And he is the great. But what makes him great? In the estimation of vernacular and modern talk, what makes him great? If you're talking about GOATs and in the greatest of all time, surely you'd have conversations about Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, Pele, Maradona, Messi maybe, Margaret Court here in our own city, Michael Phelps, Ronnie O'Sullivan for Ben at the back there, Muhammad Ali, Don Bradman, all greats. And in fact, some of them are the greatest of the greats. They really are. But how do you define greatness? Well, let's do it by the dictionary. How does the dictionary define greatness? It's a term of comparison, said Webster's 1828. Noah Webster in his 1828 dictionary. He says a term of comparison denoting more magnitude or extension than something else or beyond what is usual. So it's a comparison term. To say someone is great or to say something is great is to compare it, and something that is beyond usual, beyond the normal, beyond the usual, Webster says that's great. Dictionary.com says something or someone considerably above average. It might be in an amount, intensity, quality, eminence, but greatness is considerably above average, or beyond what is usual. We have here before us Job, and we find that Job was great among men. Great before men. Look at verse 3. It says, in his substance also, but at the very end of this, he says he was very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all men of the East. So he was beyond normal, above average. This is not just your average guy. He was beyond normal and above average, and he was great before men in two ways, two particular ways that I think is a good way for us also tonight to define greatness. He had wealth. He was wealthy. That's why he was great, because he was wealthy. He was beyond the average wealth of an average individual. And how was he wealthy? He was wealthy in family, finances, and friends. Things that he was all wealthy in. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters, 10 children, and that seemed to be above average maybe. Definitely for today, that would be above average to say he's got 10 sons, they're all well and healthy, and daughters, and they've got their own houses and their lives, and they're enjoying life, and he had a big family and a big household, and in that household he had servants and he had maids, and so he would say he had a great household. He was above average. Job's household was above average, and his family, he was wealthy in his family. He was wealthy in his finances. It says also in verse 3 that he had 7,000 sheep, wool, and all the textiles that come along with that. He had 3,000 camels. Camels are used for food and for milk, for textiles as well. I didn't realize that you use camel hair. You can use camel hair for textiles. But also camels, I think of transportation. So you think here is Job in this wealthy man, just like a lot of wealthy people, kind of have his fingers in a few different pies. He's got his sheep business, and that's the wool, and he's got his transportation business, and he's got his camel trucks, and you are passing on the back of a camel. You'd probably read, "You are now passing another Job." However it works. And he had a very wealthy individual, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household. So those servants and his maids that were there, he was just beyond the normal. This was not normal. Job was above normal. He was great. He was above average. And he had lots of friends. He was very well known in society. He said he lost a lot of friends when he lost his wealth and lost his family. He said, a lot of my friends don't even spend time with me, he says in chapter 19, verse 14 and verse 19. But he was wealthy. But the other metric that I think you measure greatness before men, one is wealth and another is influence. If you are wealthy and you are influential, then you are great amongst men. That's how our world works. You think of the people today that are great before men, they are wealthy and influential. Now Job says, look at this chapter number 29. Chapter number 29 of Job. Job 29, verse 21, he says, "Unto me men gave ear, and waited and kept silence at my counsel. After my words they spake not again, and my speech dropped upon them. And they waited for me as for rain, and they opened their mouth wide as for latter rain. If I laughed on them, they believed it not, and the light of my countenance they cast not down. I chose out their way, and sat chief, and dwelt as a king in the army, as one that comforteth the mourners." So he is saying this, when people came, or you could put it like this, when Job spoke, people listened. He was a man of influence. What does Job have to say about the matter? Go see Job. He's wealthy and influential amongst our community. He is above normal and above average. And so the Bible describes him as great and very great and the greatest of all the men. He was the greatest amongst men, wealthy and influential. But he was also great before God. Look at verse number 8 of chapter number 1. Verse number 8 of chapter number 1, where we left off our reading. It says, "And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth?" What do you think another word or another phrase might be to describe the phrase, none like him? Beyond normal, beyond average, above these things. He's great. He is before me, God says, this is a great man. There is none like him. He's above average and above what is usual. And in what metrics was God measuring the greatness of a man? Well, it tells us he was perfect and upright. That's the metrics by which God was measuring the greatness of Job. He was perfect and upright. It means he was true. You know when when something rings, you have the expression that something rings true. Something is, and if a story is told, we say that story rings true, or we might say it doesn't ring true, it rings hollow, or we mean what we mean by it. We can tell whether something is genuine or not genuine, and we have that expression. Well, that's what Job is. When he's perfect, he was true. It's like when you pick up the watermelon and you knock on it to see the density of it and to see if it has that good sound, this is going to be a good watermelon. If it has that kind of thud kind of sound, it's not going to have the good taste. And you can tell by knocking on it. Well, when Job was knocked on in life, whatever the circumstances, he rang true. He was a perfect man. He was genuinely godly. He was perfect and upright is how the Bible puts it. He was perfect and upright. He was genuinely true. And the other metric that God said is that he eschewed evil. Now, eschewed means this: deliberately avoided. That's what it means to eschew something. He deliberately avoided evil. He deliberately avoided using, or he abstained from. It means to flee from, to shun, to avoid. So Job is the kind of person, when the conversation went off colour, Job disappeared. He wasn't the one who was going to hang around when they're saying, hey, did you hear this joke that the Nephilim used to tell before the flood? He was like, nope, no, I'm not in this one. Sorry, I'm out. And whatever else the jokes might be or whatever the conversation might have turned to, Job says, I'm not here listening to this. I'm going to eschew evil. I'm deliberately avoiding evil. When the business deals started becoming shady, and they said, right, if we do it like this and like this and like this, we will reap more money and they don't have to know. Job, in his character before God, he eschewed evil and said, I'm out. But they said, Job, you're going to make more money. And Job said, I'm not in for the money. I'm here to do right in the sight of God. That was how Job was. This is how Job lived his life. Every part of his life, he eschewed evil. He was perfect and upright. You didn't find him at the pub. You wouldn't find him watching things he shouldn't be watching. He was a man who feared God. He feared God. It means this. What does it mean to fear God? He was serious about God. He was serious about God. God's opinion mattered to Job. If you were to go out in the streets today, randomly in Forest Chase, and you were to take a verse and you were to read to them, I've been looking a lot this week, for one reason or another, on homosexuality, and heard a testimony of a man who came out of homosexuality and has now been 10 years saved out of the homosexual lifestyle, and he gives his interesting perspective on it. But if you were to take the verses that are in the Bible against homosexuality and you were to show that to people on the street and you say, do you care what God says? They would say, no, I don't care what that old archaic book has to say. Get it out of my face. They are not a person who fears God. But Job is a man who says, I fear God and I respect and I care about what his opinion is. And so I'm going to do the things that God delights in, and I'm not going to do the things that God doesn't delight in. So Job was a man who feared God. God's opinion mattered to Job. So you have Job. By whatever metric you want to measure Job, Job was a great man. Wealthy and influential, great before men. Eschewed evil and feared God, great before God. He was great. Now let me ask you a very simple little question tonight in closing, and to give this some rubber to the road. Do you ever imagine greatness for yourself? Do you ever imagine that you put yourself in some kind of thought where you are above average amongst your peers? Might be in career, in wealth, in family, in friends, to be the most popular amongst a social group. It might be one of these things that Job was measured before men in family, finances, and friends. To have a large family, to have a well-respected family, or whatever it might be. And we think of greatness. We think of ourselves above average in these areas. When I was year 7, primary school, I used to imagine myself being great at basketball, above my peers. That if I could be basketball, I would be above everyone else. And I'd go to the school. I went to my little school here, but if I could just go up that road and go to that high school up there, I'd show them, and I'd like to prove that I'm better than them, that I'm great on the basketball court amongst my peers. It's how the vain imaginations think. If I could just make more money than my father made, or if I could just be more successful than my brother, or we think of all these things to try and elevate ourselves and be great amongst men. But do we ever stop and consider and imagine if we're going to be great before God? Do you ever imagine that? Do you ever stop in your vain imaginations of sorts? Do you ever stop and think, man, I'd like to be perfect and upright and be great in the sight of God? Or is all your thoughts and all your imaginations only consumed in being great in the sight of men? Because Job, though he was great in the sight of men, he really cared about being great in the sight of God. And they were two different metrics to be judged by. Wealth and influence has no bearing on whether a person is great before God. You can have zero influence and you can live on a deserted island with a palm tree, and you can be great in the sight of God and be poor with no influence. Because being right before God and being great in the sight of God